Welcome to our continuing series, How to Triage Cancer, in partnership with Armor Up for Life. My name is Loriana Hernandez Aldama. I'm a two-time cancer survivor and founder of Armor Up for Life, where we help amplify the patient voice. So today's topic is so very important to patients who are diagnosed with cancer. So joining me are the founders of Triage Cancer, Joanna Morales and Monica Bryant, also attorneys, thus Triage Cancer. And so thank you both so much for joining us. And let's begin with, for someone who takes time off work, how do they know about how to handle taking time off work when they're diagnosed with cancer? Joanna, I want to go ahead and start with you.
Well, when we're talking about taking time off work, whether it's for a short period of time or maybe even for a couple of months, it's important to understand what your rights are in the workplace. And the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, or the FMLA, is one of the most useful laws that allow people to take time off work and get access to job protection while they're taking that time off work. So people can take time off work either for their own serious medical condition, but it's also available to caregivers who are taking time off work if they're caring for a spouse, a parent, or a child with a serious health condition.
And I do want to ask about that, because we have so many families who contact Armor Up for Life and they need help navigating cancer. And most recently, I had a family contact me. The male who was diagnosed with leukemia had only been at his job for 5 months. His wife, who needed to take care of him, had only been at her job 11 months and needed FMLA, which didn't kick into a year. So when you're in these odd situations like that, and you've never expected this to happen to you, what do you do?
Well, I think first it's important, when you're understanding what your rights are, is to understand the requirements that you have to meet in order to use those protections. And for the FMLA, that does include that you work for a large enough employer with 50 or more employees, if you work for a private employer, or a state, local, or federal government. But also you have to work there a year, and you have to work there 1,250 hours in the last year that you worked for the employer. So if you don't meet one of those requirements, then you have to look to see what else is available. And that's why we always say it's important to not just understand what's available to you at the federal level, but also look to the state laws that might provide some protection or even better protection than the federal law. And then understanding all of the laws that might pertain to your situation. And in the situation you mentioned, there are potentially some other things that might help that person take time off of work.
And I want to send it to Monica for that. What are some other options? I think about this family, which it just broke my heart to hear their situation, but they're not the only ones. There's so many families who may work at a place that doesn't even have FMLA, or they don't have those options available. What do they do? And where do they turn?
It is definitely not an uncommon thing. We hear stories like that on a daily basis. I would just say that it's also important to remember that the law is just the bare minimum of what employers are required to provide. And many employers are actually much more generous than that bare minimum. So often it's helpful to start with what's available at your specific employer. So checking to see if the employer has a policy around sick time or vacation time or other types of PTO. And, some places it's easier than others to find that information, but it is key to make sure people understand that piece first.
So both of you are saying, hey, first, if you are employed, contact your human resource department and let the department know, him or her, hey, I have a medical situation and I need to know what my rights are.
Joanna, I think not every employer has a full-fledged HR department. In some employers, it's a person. In some employers, there isn't actually anyone that is specifically defined in that role. So it really is going to be very situationally specific, but it is helpful, I think, for people to look for potentially a policy and procedures manual or some sort of employee document if it exists. If someone is still struggling, certainly talking to whomever at the job handles employee benefits, like who do you turn your timesheet into, for example, could be a good starting point if it really isn't clear.
And something that, again, breaks my heart, I was very transparent through both cancers that I had, leukemia and breast cancer, because I was a public figure and I shared my story. But so many people have no choice but to hide behind their cancer and their illness because for reasons like this, they may not be able to come out publicly and say, I need help. They can't do it because of their employer. In this situation, the family that reached out to Arm Up for Life said they just said they requested medical leave. They didn't even want to mention the word cancer because they were scared that they would write them off. They might have their position dissolved. And just the wheel of fear starts to go into effect. So, Joanna, do you want to step in of some other ways to handle that and also finding ways to replace your lost income?
So I think the first piece of that is the issue around disclosure and how do you decide who to share information with at work? How do you share that? How much do you share? And that's always going to be an incredibly personal decision in terms of what you decide to talk about your medical condition at work. But if you do want to access some of the legal protections, like taking time off under the Family and Medical Leave Act, you do have to share enough information with the employer that shows why you actually qualify to take that time off. And so when we're talking about a cancer diagnosis, most of the time, the reason you need to take time off is not because of the diagnosis itself. It's usually because that you're going through treatment or you have a side effect from treatment. And so you can talk about the need to be having treatment without talking about the original medical condition, or you could talk about the side effects that you're experiencing without ever tying them back to an original cancer diagnosis. So if you have fatigue or neuropathy or anxiety or any of the potential side effects that might come along with treatment, you could talk about those things because they're medical conditions on their own without ever saying they result from a cancer diagnosis. So for someone who's concerned about sharing a cancer diagnosis specifically at work, that provides some flexibility in how you fill out the certification forms to get access to that FMLA leave.
So Monica, are there other laws that will help you take time off?
I'm so glad that you asked. So many people are familiar with the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, for an option to take time off. There's actually another federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And many people are familiar with the ADA because of things like ramps into buildings or accessible parking spots. But the ADA did some really important things in the employment context too. And one of the things it does is it provides individuals with a disability access to a tool called a reasonable accommodation. And a reasonable accommodation can really be anything that is reasonable for that person's situation. So for some people, it might be about, special furniture, but for some people, it could be about shifting schedules or reducing hours, or even taking some extended time off as well.
That's a good point. Joanna, do you want to add in on that? That seems to be what I was discussing with this family about maybe scaling back the work schedule, seeing if your office can be a little flexible. But Joanna, maybe you can add on is when people think disability, they think disability through the government versus through their work. Can you get both? Can you just get one? How does this all play out?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of confusion around the term disability and what that actually means. And so every law and program that we talk about has a different definition of disability, and that can include someone who has a cancer diagnosis. So when Monica was talking about the ADA can actually protect someone from discrimination in the workplace if they have a cancer diagnosis and give them access to reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations, we think, are a really underutilized tool to not just stay at work or return to work, but also to be able to take time off. So for someone who doesn't qualify for the FMLA because they haven't worked there long enough, or they don't have enough hours, or it's a smaller employer, they might actually look to the ADA for the ability to take time off work. That type of disability is different than when we talk about disability insurance. And disability insurance is money that pays us what we would have been making, or a portion of what we would have been making, but because we need to take time off work due to a medical condition. And so when we're taking that time off, disability insurance is paying us, and it's replacing those lost wages.
but it does not come with the job. So is there job protection? Monica, do you want to add to that?
So disability insurance is about money, whereas the FMLA or the state leave laws, or potentially the ADA or the state fair employment laws, is the piece that's going to help provide job protection. So it's really valuable to use those two things together.
Okay, this is such great information. And while you're talking, if you see the wheels spinning in my head, it takes me back to the day I was diagnosed with AML leukemia. And while I had a great employer, either I was not of sound mind because I'm hearing I had 25% chance of survival. I'm hearing all these numbers separated from my son. And I don't feel that they prepared me to tell me what my rights were. So even though I had a great HR department, I felt like I needed to navigate that on my own. So if somebody is watching and they feel like I'm not getting the answers I need from whoever is handling my timesheet or my HR, where do they start? Where do they go? Triage Cancer, of course, to your website, but what else, what other steps do they take to start navigating this on their own or with a caregiver?
So I think a good first step, as you mentioned, is starting with an employee manual or any type of policies and procedures that their employer have to talk about these types of abilities to take time off or access to disability insurance at work. But if they don't have access to that, then talking to HR or any of the people at their workplace who can provide additional details about their rights and benefits. But we do have a lot of information at triagecancer.org on how to navigate your employment rights and or access disability insurance. You can also call your disability insurance company to learn more about what benefits you have access to specifically through the policy that you have.
And I want to add that for anybody watching, if you're watching because you're a caregiver or a friend of someone affected by cancer, it is never too late. And I know both of you will agree with me to start learning what your rights are long before you're ever diagnosed with any sort of illness, because trying to navigate disability, FMLA, and all of that in a time of crisis is not fun. And again, I can't remember everything they told me at the time because I was in crisis. So it's a good thing that for everyone to really go through your website, get to know what their rights are in case anything like this ever happens to them.
We do say that a lot, in that almost everything that we talk about at Triage Cancer, we talk about through the lens of a cancer diagnosis, but it's just practical information that everybody should understand about their employment rights or their health insurance options or how to access other types of insurance. So we want everybody to be better prepared with this information.
It's all about preparation. As you see, I have prepare, present, prevail. I say we have to all prepare ourselves for illness so we could present well to our medical team, which will position ourselves to prevail. And the tools that both of you have and what you provide at Triage Cancer is part of that preparation so we can be positioned to prevail. So I think it's great insight. It's always wonderful to talk to both of you. Joanna Morales and Monica Bryant with Triage Cancer, thank you so much. And we're looking forward to our next episode. So stick around for the next episode where we will talk more about disability insurance.